Welcome back to State of the Division, this time with UFC 319, a card with some interesting promise throughout. Admittedly, I do think the highlight of the night and the reason you look at this card is the title fight. Plessis, Chimaev looks to be super interesting. It's a fight that has a lot of question marks around it, and it's just an interesting fight to even just think about. I think it'll be a super fun fight to watch. But I think sprinkled throughout, you've got fights that hold interesting promise with some newcomers, relative newcomers in Asakura's case, some new guys coming up the ranks and people trying to establish themselves. But all that said, we do have to get into two things before we kick it all off: the housekeeping and the butcher's bill. So with housekeeping, I went for a career worse, 5-9 on the last card. Not great at all. It was a lot of close fights, but in terms of what I could have fixed, I was too willing to try for the happy ending of Poirier beating Holloway. I think I could have and should have just picked Holloway off the cuff. And I think rolling with Kopylov over Costa backfired on me a bit. I had a lot more confidence in Kopylov's slickness, if you will, versus Costa's more straightforward style, and it did not work in my favor. With all this, in the effort to bury this behind me, I now sit at 61, 35, and 1 on the year. Still with a chance to get to 100 correct predictions, but definitely a lot harder now with only 4 months left. For the Butcher's Bill, this might be wrong as of the time of recording, but as it stands, this is all the info I have. JJ Aldrich was the only and first casualty of this card at the time of writing. She received an injury in training camp and was replaced by Dion Barbosa. However, it was updated to a point that the Kareem Silva fight that JJ Aldrich was in is no longer listed on the UFC stats page, and instead is only listed on the Sherdog page as a fight against Dion Barbosa. I am assuming it's still on the card. I have no idea. All that being said, let's get into it all. Kicking this whole thing off, I believe this fight, again, isn't listed on UFC stats, but is listed on Sherdog. UFC newcomer 10-0 Alibi Idiris, who is so new there was no photo on his Sherdog page, takes on the 12-2 Joseph Bopo Morales. Age is not listed for Idiris, but Morales is 30, no difference in listed height, and not a clue on reach. Now, Idiris is a little weird to get a hold on with how annoying it's been to chase data down for him, but with 4 career KO and 4 career decision wins, I feel that calling him a striking-focused finisher is at least fair. 2 of his last 4 wins both come by KO, helping kind of paint that picture a bit more. He does seem to be fairly explosive in terms of style. In that vein, he tends to finish quickly, with all but 2 of his 6 finish wins coming in the first, though he has also not had a problem going long looking at his decision wins. Morales is more of a ground-focused finisher with 6 career submission wins and what looks like a solid control game. Now, he also doesn't have a whole lot of numbers to look at, but as a whole seemed to have problems with some power punchers with the loss to Devison Figueiredo back in 2018. I am going to make the assumption that his striking is a bit of the grappler standard based on the old UFC numbers, but he has been able to win all his fights since 2021, although there was a 3-year layoff leading into that. No odds for this one. Hell, it's actually only listed on Sherdog's page and a few other websites I checked, but I think I'm going to roll with the Idiris here. It's nothing against Morales, but part of this decision is based on the fact that Idiris has been more active, 5 fights since 2021, compared to Morales only having 3 fights since 2018. The more active fighter does tend to do a bit better, being the hotter hand and all that. Plus, Idiris seems to have a more rounded game, better on the feet than what Morales looks like, which is a point in his favor, and when it comes to the ground game, he looks to be capable enough, avoiding being finished by that way, and he looks to be able to manage the ground game good enough in the few highlights I watched of him kind of getting ready for this. So in the end, I'm going to pick Idiris. 18-5 Kareem Killer Silva looks for the quick rebound against the replacement, 8-3 Dion the Witch Barbosa. Silva is 2 years younger at 31, 1 or 2 inches shorter with a single inch in reach going her way. Silva is a submission-focused finisher with the additional ability to stack takedowns if unable to land her finish. And with 4 of her 5 UFC wins being by submission, 3 of those 4 coming before the end of the first round, we see that she likes to be aggressive with taking the fight to the ground. In that regard, she works a 2.79 takedown average with what looks to be preference to lead the action. She has only been taken down 5 times total so far in the UFC, but with a 0% takedown defense, I'm not sure if she's fine playing off her back or is just very used to leading the action. Because in her first UFC loss, she was taken down 3 times for 2.25 of control time. Moving to the striking, she works a grappler standard 3.04 to 3.14, a completely functional style that lets her hang in a fight and let her takedowns be the separator in those. Barbosa is the replacement for this fight and comes in with a pretty large background in judo, which has somewhat translated into the UFC with the presence of consistent takedowns and an effective ground game. Looking at that first, she rolls a 1.93 takedown average. She's capable of generating decent chunks of control time off her takedowns, but can be mashed or overwhelmed against some other fighters, looking at Miranda Maverick especially. She has also landed a submission in her most recent fight, bringing her career total to 4. Silva is the favorite here, and with a little bit of hesitation, I will agree. I do have to admit that I think Barbosa has the submission ability to catch Silva and put her away. But in the grand scheme of things, that seems like a much longer shot in this fight. When you look at Silva, Silva is the fighter coming into this fight, so she's had a full camp. Silva has a ground game capable of controlling other ground-focused fighters and dictating paces of fights, not to mention that Silva has submission ability. So they're even in submission, but Silva seems to have the better everything else. And looking at it all, we saw what Miranda Maverick did to Barbosa, which is something that I think Karine Silva is capable of doing, taking her down, leading the action there, and controlling it. So in the end, I'm going to pick Karine Silva. 12-2-0-1 Brian the Butcher Battle looks for 3 in a row against 36-9-2-2 Meerschaert, Black Ruziboev. Battle is 1 year younger at 30. Ruziboev is 3 or 4 inches taller, with Battle taking back an inch in reach. Battle lives up to his ring name as a finisher, with 5 of his 9 UFC fights not going the distance. There looks to be a general preference for the striking, 3 of his 5 UFC finishes being by KO, but in his career he does have 5 submission wins, 2 of those in the UFC. Starting in the striking, carries a 5.12 to 4.11. Does tend to pull ahead and lead the fight if it goes past the first, but against some opponents he can be outpaced and forced to fight from behind, relying on the judges. He backs us all up with a situational takedown and ground game that he uses for disruption and solid chunks of control time. Plus, as mentioned above, he has the ability to sink these submissions either off control or defensively. Ruziboev is thoroughly a finisher. 3 of his 4 UFC wins coming by KO, with 13 career KO wins plus submission ability that has shown up more outside of the UFC with 20 career submission wins. Back to the UFC numbers, however, he rolls with a 2.59 to 2.89 in the striking, which looks odd but is heavily weighted by a unanimous decision loss to Joaquin Buckley, where he was outstruck 86-31. In every other fight, he outstruck his opponent with only 1 of them going the distance. Looking at the takedowns, he works with his 0.75 takedown average, with 2 landed takedowns in the UFC, but also the ability to reverse position and take control when taken down. Of course, he only has a 33% takedown defense, but seems to be able to survive in most cases, though that Buckley fight is the big outlier. Vegas likes Battle in this bout, and I find myself agreeing yet again. Battle comes in as the quicker paced fighter, capable of utilizing takedowns to help slow down his opponent. This formula is very similar to what we saw Joaquin Buckley do against him, slowing down his striking by taking control of the ground and racking up his own points when they were on the feet. Now, Ruziboev does have finishability. On the same hand, though, so does Battle. So, with finishability being equal, if you will, I'm going to take the difference here, which is the quicker pace striking and that situational ground game that resembles, while not being the same, of what Buckley was able to do against him. So in the end, I'm going to pick Battle to win this fight, although Ruziboev does have a shot. 24-12, Edson Barboza squares up against 15-3-1 Drakkar Klose. Klose is 2 years younger at 37, 2 or 3 inches shorter with 5 inches of reach, also going to Barboza.
Very, very careful. 10 seconds remaining. Really poses the question, what do you want to do? Do you want to take dangerous strikers before, knows how to handle it? Oh my goodness, both men ever. Good left. Barboza, oh my goodness. Times Barboza's got enough. He got him! Edson Barboza! He entered with one of the best highlight reels in the sport. Nice lead. Barbosa's, you want to take a chance and risk getting knocked out? Oh my God! That word knockout. And maybe the most spectacular knockout in UFC history.
Klose, however, is more of a grinder, who has found a finishing touch in 2 of his last 4 wins. Seems to have a fairly rounded game, but has decent reliance on takedowns and ground control to serve as a separator when the fight turns close. A 1.65 takedown average showing how often he deploys a takedown in his fights. Off of them, he generates decent chunks of control, though they aren't overwhelming, mostly just effect. Oddly enough, though, no career submission wins. Moving to the striking, he has a 4.33 to 3.54, capable of edging out a lead over his opponent, and at worst, being able to hang in and just let his ground game build points and control time. Now, the overall striking totals of his fights aren't incredibly high, but that has to do with how he tends to slow the fight down with takedowns and prevent his opponent from getting the defense rolling. Barboza's the recipient of a very narrow Vegas nod here, and after deliberating it over a bit while writing this, I am going to go with Klose and disagree. Now, I do have to admit off the bat that this is a bit of a gamble. Barboza's proven the ability to survive ground games before, but in this fight, I think Klose has a good enough ground game to A, be able to land the takedowns, and B, be able to slow down Barboza's offense enough to where he can't begin to outpace him. And Klose has been good enough at avoiding getting finished or being able to endure enough damage while he's in control that I think in this fight, Klose has the ability to control Barboza enough to kind of get the points. And for another example, if we look at how Lerone Murphy got past Barboza, it was a similar game plan to what I think Klose is able to do. Now, in what I think opens up the prelim, 16-3-0-1 Chase the Dream Hooper looks for his second win of 2025 against the 16-8 Alexander Great Ape Hernandez. Hooper is 7 years younger, 4 inches taller, with 2 inches of reach, also going his way. Hooper rolls into this match on a 5-fight win streak and comes across as very much a finisher with some really good ground game. He has submissions in 3 of his last 5 wins and takedowns in 4 of his last 5. Looking at the takedowns first, he works a 2.59 average with the aforementioned heavy use of them. Does tend to stack them and is able to get chunks of control time from them, but the main angle from them has always been the submissions. In that regard, he averages 2.2 submissions per 15 minutes. This means he is constantly threatening submissions even in fights he doesn't land them. With those, he seems to be able to work from control or play from his back a bit, though it's more so survival in that case. He does tend to want to lead the action, but has been able to overcome getting taken down. In the striking, he works a 4.53 to 2.96, and isn't so much a power puncher over being a swarmer. As a result, the KO touch isn't all that present, with his last KO win coming back in 2022. He can be outpaced on the feet, but lately has been able to slow his opponents down while letting the offense build. Hernandez has been more of a grinder lately, his last 5 fights all going to the judges, with him notching 3 wins. The striking is his main focus with a 4.38 to 4.62, showing his ability to work through a fight and wade through fires to take a lead and get the nod. He can be matched on the feet, but oftentimes is able to take some sort of lead and hold it to the end. We see it pretty often where he's able to slow down his opponent's offense and eventually amass a pretty significant striking lead come the final bell. He does have KO power, but the last finish by that method was in 2021. His ground game is weird at 1.24 average, but very much situational, appearing in select fights where he was able to slow his opponents down and use it to get a nod from the judges, winning key rounds by simply slowing their offense down and notching the control time. Hooper looks to be the favorite coming into this fight, and I think I will be agreeing. This is a fight I'm pretty uneasy about, as both fighters have a pretty clear path to victory. Hernandez has a very good control game, and if Hooper gets caught, I think Hernandez could take the win here. But I kind of have faith in Hooper's ground game and ability to rack the takedowns plus the submission threat. Now, Hernandez does seem to have the edge in striking, but he's been outpaced before, and I think Hooper can at least match him there. And with the constant threat of takedown, that's another tool in his bag that Hernandez might have to be wary about. And if Hooper is able to take control from the top and get his takedown game going before Hernandez is able to take control in that regard, I think the needle just tilts that much more in favor of Hooper. 26-14 Jessica Barriestaca Andrade goes for the rebound win against 13-5 Lupita Lupi Godinez. Godinez is 2 years younger, either dead draw in height or 1 inch in her favor, with Andrade taking another inch in reach. Andrade is a killer-be-killed fighter with a well-rounded game that can catch people at any point throughout the fight, though obviously she can be caught in turn. Looking at the striking first, she carries a 6.39 to 5.49, pushing a decent pace and generally staying ahead of her opponents, though obviously with those numbers, she does get tagged back a bit in return. The KO power is a little inconsistent, coming out in different rounds with different striking totals, sometimes being more a single-shot power puncher and then a swarmer in others. In turn, she can be caught and put away when it comes to these fights. This same idea carries over to the ground game, where she carries a 2.21 average, with it making a consistent appearance in most of her fights. With it is some control time, but also this major submission thread that she pulls from both control and from the back. Now, like the striking, she can be outpaced on the ground, getting taken down and controlled, with some opponents working quick to sink submissions in before she can really get started. Godinez is more of a grinder, focused on using the ground game to slow the fight down and take control. A 3.12 takedown average, highlighting how often she lands and secures them. She tends to stack them with regularity, racking up the control time and trying to limit her opponent's offense. There is some submission ability that is slightly inconsistent, but at least something to acknowledge. Now, she can be matched on the ground or even overcome, letting her opponents actually begin to mount offense in return. With the striking, she works a solid 4.28 to 3.87. It's nothing spectacular, but more than able to at least apply constant pressure and outpace her opponents, forcing them to try and catch up and letting her work comfortably with a lead. Vegas has it close, but does definitely favor Godinez in this fight. And I find myself agreeing. Godinez is consistent with her ability to stack quantities of takedowns and limit her opponent's offense. This is something that has beaten Andrade a handful of times, where she's not able to get control, get her ground game going, instead is dominated, or at least controlled, by her opponent's ground game. And Godinez seems to be able to at least implement this game plan well enough, with a striking that's hopefully going to be able to at least keep pace if Andrade tries to go at her on the feet. So in the end, I think Godinez has enough tools in order to win this fight. 37-19 Gerald GM3 Meerschaert takes the cage against the 29-0-1 Mikhail Oleksiejczuk. Oleksiejczuk is 7 years younger, but Meerschaert takes an inch in height with another 3 inches of reach, also going his way. Meerschaert is a ground-focused fighter with a solid takedown and a threatening submission game. All 4 of his most recent wins coming by submission. with 5 of his last 7 fights ending in a finish. Now, in the numbers, he carries a 1.86 takedown average, speaking of how he doesn't necessarily need to stack the takedowns and generally doesn't work off of a single takedown or scramble to set off his submission. Of course, he can stack them, it just isn't consistent. He seems to be able to survive being taken down to some degree, but on the same hand, he has been controlled before. Moving to the striking, he carries the grappler standard 3.05 to 3.43, completely able to hang in against his opponents, but does rely on his ground game in order to really create a difference between them. Oleksiejczuk is much more of a striking-focused finisher with some really solid KO power, a 5.27 to 4.51 in striking, showing his pace and ability to get out ahead of his opponents, in addition to the aforementioned KO power that comes out with some regularity. All 4 of his last wins coming by KO. Surprisingly, in terms of the striking, he has yet to be finished by strikes in the UFC, though he has been slowed down and controlled by his opponents on the feet. Ground game sits at a 1.05 average, but is very inconsistent, not something he calls on that much. And when he has, it hasn't been that effective. He has struggled with getting taken down and slowed down by other opponents. Oleksiejczuk gets the Vegas nod in this fight, and I will be agreeing with only a few reservations. Oleksiejczuk does have the much more active striking and the more consistent KO power compared to Meerschaert. However, Meerschaert does have the better ground game. My big reason for picking Oleksiejczuk is that we've seen him overcome other opponents' ground games, at least be able to survive, get back to his feet, and get back to the striking. I think in this fight, I think he'll be able to at least survive Meerschaert's ground game or prevent getting finished to get the fight back to the feet. And on the feet, I think he has the clear advantage and the KO power to win this fight. Ending off the prelims, we have a bout between 32-17, 1-1 King Green, who's looking to rebound against the 19-6 Diego Ferreira. Green is 2 years younger at 38, with 1 inch of height heading his way, with 3 inches of reach though, favoring Ferreira. Green very much reads as a kill-or-be-killed fighter capable of putting people away or getting caught in turn. There is a definite preference for the striking, a 6.40 to 3.72, showing his ability to push a pace and bury his opponents alive if the fight goes long, in addition to being able to end it early before his opponents can get started. Even when he does get finished, he tends to be close in numbers, even leading in some fights. His ground game also plays a role, albeit something closer to a matchup or situational piece with limited appearances. He does have a 1.22 average and some pretty good success in most of the fights he decides to shoot in. He can be matched down there, as seen as with his bout against Paddy Pimblett, where he landed a takedown and led strikes before getting submitted. Ferreira is very much a similar fighter with a dangerous finishing touch, though he does seem to be able to grind the finish a little bit more. In the striking, he works with a 4.82 to 3.46, working an overall closer striking style and a lot of his fights relying on the power or ground game to get the win in the end. He can be, and has been, caught on the feet, with 2 of his last 5 wins seeing him be finished. The ground game also plays a major role in the style, acting as an equalizer and control piece, a 0.86 takedown average while also being able to stack them, slowing down his opponents to generate control time. However, he can be taken down and controlled in turn, meaning he really wants to lead the action, seeming to struggle when taken down. He is able to survive takedowns, but in terms of gaining control or getting offense going, he struggles a fair amount with that. It's a close fight across the board, but the Vegas favorite is Ferreira, and being a bit boring, I will agree. Green can 100% win this fight. He has the KO power and the occasional ability to just take control of the flow of a fight. But Ferreira has also had this KO touch a bit more in his recent wins, and seems to be able to match up well with Green's ground game, and at least be able to endure or negate most of his striking if he's able to get his ground game going. So I think with the KO power kind of sitting even, I think the takedown game becomes the separator, and I think Ferreira has the better takedown game. Into the main card, we have 20-13-1 Tim Elliott squaring off against the 21-5 Kai Asakura in his second UFC fight. Asakura is 7 years younger, 1 inch taller, with 3 inches of reach, also in his favor. Elliott is a ground-focused fighter with some nasty finish ability kind of lurking in the wing, rolling with a 3.73 takedown average, with takedowns in all but 2 of his UFC fights and takedowns in every single one of his wins. He does seem to prefer to lead the action on the ground, with how he likes to stack them and build the control time lead. And while he has been mashed on the ground or even surpassed, these are very uncommon. To talk about his submission ability, it does seem to rely on him being in control and not something he will land on scrambles or defensive position. Swapping to the striking, he works a decent 3.39 to 2.66. Nothing spectacular, but completely functional for how he fights. Definitely able to be outpaced on the feet and has been a handful of times, so there is definite reliance on the ground game to help slow his opponent down and keep the fight there. Asakura is still a bit of a wild card, with his only fight in the UFC being a submission loss to Alexandre Pantoja at UFC 310. He still trends towards being a finisher with a preference for the striking. 13 career KO wins, 3 of the last 5 of his wins coming by KO. With that, he was able to be matched on the feet and knocked out, with 3 of his 4 losses coming by KO. He does also have 3 career submission wins, but I don't have any idea if he needs to land a takedown or to set up, or can he play from guard or off his opponent's scrambles. Asakura is the Vegas favorite here for this fight, and I think I'm agreeing. I'm a little tentative on this. Something in me doesn't quite sit right, but while Elliott is the UFC veteran and does have the skills to win this fight with his ability to rack up takedowns and control time, I'm sort of banking on the idea that it was Pantoja's takedowns and aggressiveness that caused Asakura to struggle so much. That Asakura can rebound, come in against this opponent, and do much better this time. He's proven the ability to survive takedowns outside the UFC, and I imagine if he's able to survive here and keep the fight on the feet, he has the power advantage, and he has the definite advantage in striking. So it comes down to, can Asakura survive Elliott's takedown game? And I think in this fight he'll be able to, based on what he's shown outside the UFC, and not that Pantoja fight. 18-8 Jared, the Killer Gorilla Cannonier, looks for a war against the 23-3 Michael Venom Page. Somehow Page is the younger fighter here by 3 years, with 3 or 4 inches of height also going his way, with another 2 in reach also being in his favor. Cannonier is the UFC vet here, with his first fight coming back in 2015, and throughout it all, he's been an explosive fighter capable of ending the fight with a single shot. He's more so a killer bee decision fighter over a killer bee killed, but seems to struggle against fighters capable of slowing the fight down and limiting his offense. But to talk about his offense, he rolls with a 4.60 to 4.49, speaking to his reliance on power as an equalizer and willingness to engage to try and land shots. In turn, we see that fighters who are able to push a quicker pace or manage the engagements tend to perform well against him, looking at Adesanya, Barallo, and even Whitaker. The ground game is present as a matchup piece with a .46 average and more consistent appearances in the last 3 years. In those fights, he's been able to bring out his power to get control time and some major ground and pound. Page is still relatively new to the UFC, but has been much more a control-based fighter during this point of his career, all 3 fights going the distance. His totals reflect that, a 2.53 to 1.78, constantly taking these slight striking leads where he minimizes a lot of damage coming back his way, but keeps the overall totals low, the highest overall being 81 total significant strikes thrown in a fight. He has seemed to struggle a little bit with takedowns, being taken down 4 times across his first 2 UFC fights. Does carry a 63% takedown defense and was able to survive Kevin Holland in their bout, so there is some skill when it comes to working with the ground and getting back up off of it. The narrow Vegas nod goes to Page, and I think I will be disagreeing here and rolling with Cannonier. This is one part blatant favoritism, but the other part is that Cannonier has the definite advantage in power, while also having that takedown game. If he is able to land the takedowns in the fight, which he's proven he can more recently, I think Page will struggle a lot more. We saw him struggle with giving up control time to Kevin Holland, and while he won that fight, it was a bit closer than it probably should have been. And against Ian Gary, he wasn't able to get his offense going or take control of the fight how he wanted, and found himself taken down and controlled for long periods of time. And while I think that Page is the better striker in terms of keeping distance and measuring the damage coming back, if Cannonier is able to get his power out and land these heavy shots, I think Page encounters a problem here. I don't know if Page can put Cannonier away. So in the end, I am going to pick Cannonier to win this fight. 16-6 Jeff hands a steel Neal. Looks for a finish against the equally lethal 21-7 Carlos the Nightmare Prates. Prates is 3 years younger, 2 inches of height, also going his way with another 3 in reach being in his favor. Neal is a heavy-handed finisher capable of ending a fight in a blink. 2 of his last 3 wins coming by KO, with 3 of his last 4 fights ending by finish. The striking is obviously his main focus, a 5.05 to 5.44 average, showing how willing he is to step in and exchange, letting power be his decider. That being said, he doesn't always lead his fights, falling behind by decent margins in his losses and still being behind in some of his wins. Sure, his power is an equalizer, but we see other opponents able to minimize the threat that it poses, like against Gary and Rakhmonov, where both outpaced him in strikes and took control of the fight, preventing him from getting his groove going and being able to land his power shot. On that note, the ground game is not a huge part of his game plan, seemingly being a situational piece used for quick disruption and recovery. He doesn't get taken down often, and he has been a victim of control time. Prates is much the same. With heavy hands and explosive KO power, he can pour on early in the fight and put it away. The striking is the main focus, a 3.60 to 4.79. Now, he has only been outstruck twice in the UFC, but it was 68-37 and 126-63. His power will act as an equalizer and is able to bring him back against Trevin Giles, but more often we see him take a slight striking lead in the early rounds. Looking to the ground game, he works a .25 and a super situational piece that has only appeared in 1 fight. That being said, he was taken down 4 times in his most recent loss to Ian Gary. Prates is the recipient of the Vegas nod here, and I think I will agree. Both fighters are finishers, and so Neal can't be counted out entirely. But the real decider for me in this bout comes down to both Prates being more consistent in the UFC with finding the KO touch, compared to the streakier Neal, and on the other hand, Prates is having a bit more reliable takedown game in comparison to Neal. So if Neal is able to start landing damage or doing something, Prates has a big disruption piece that can put Neal on the ground and give him a chance to recover, or even take chunks of control time while setting up ground and pound or whatever else he wants. I think Prates just has 1 or 2 more tools in the bag that Neal has to overcome with his power that I think give Prates the edge in my mind. 16-0-1 Lerone the Miracle Murphy welcomes UFC newcomer and Bellator veteran 13-4 Aaron Pico to the UFC. Pico is 6 years younger, 1 or 2 inches shorter with no idea on reach, though I can tell you Murphy carries a 73-inch reach. Murphy rolls into this bout as a well-rounded fighter, outpacing his opponents on the feet while racking up takedowns for control time and disruption. Doesn't tend to finish all that often. Last non-decision win coming back in 2021. Moving to the striking, we see a solid base there, a 4.53 to 2.48. It's not the quickest pace, but more than able to take these striking leads and avoid a lot of heavy damage coming back his way. This lets him take the point lead while keeping his opponent on the back foot trying to catch up. He can be matched, or at least kept pace with, but he's been more than able to handle it in most cases. Moving to the ground game, we see a 1.45 average and a more matchup or situational based strategy where he stacks them against certain opponents but lays off against others. This lets him maximize the points and control time if the fight goes to the judges. Pico is the newcomer here, so I'm a little limited in stats, but stylistically he seems to be a striking focused finisher with 9 KO wins in his career and 2 of his last 3 wins also coming by KO. In that regard, he seems to be a bit of a quick starter looking to end fights in the first. He has been able to go longer, winning fights in the third or even going to decision. He does also have a submission threat with 2 wins by that method, but I'm unsure of how exactly he sets those up. Vegas odds give the nod to Pico, and deciding live and agonizing over this still, I will agree. My main reasoning for picking Pico is that he has the better overall powerful striking and the ability to probably be a bit more explosive than Murphy. And while Murphy has overcome explosive strikers before, I think Pico also brings a wrestling background that I think kind of evens the odds more against Murphy. I had to look it up and look at other fights of his, but Pico does have pretty decent wrestling and ground abilities. And against Murphy, who that's always kind of been his part of his bag of tools, I think that makes him a lot more dangerous because I think he's able to match Murphy on the feet or even outpace him, which is a problem. And then when it comes to the ground, if Pico can even match him, they're in a dogfight now, and I think Pico has the power advantage in this dogfight. So in the end, I am going to pick Pico to win. For the main event, 23-2 Driscoll still knocks Du Plessis, looks for his 3rd defense against the monstrous 14-0 Khamzat Boars Chimaev. Even age across the board, 1 or 2 inches of height in favor of Khamzat with 1 inch of reach heading back to Driscoll. Du Plessis is an odd duck tried and described stylistically, because he really just seems to find ways to win. He seems like a power forward fighter, both in terms of straight up physical power and then finishing power, which he has in spades. Looking at the striking first, he works 6.12 to 4.90, pushing a good pace that can bury opponents if he doesn't finish them. He also does seem to have solid durability, able to wade through the damage that he is taking. And in most cases, we see him working his striking in tandem with his takedown game in order to take control of the fight and and get the win. Speaking of that takedown game, he works a 2.55 takedown average with takedowns in 7 of his 9 UFC fights. He does tend to stack them even when getting the finish, racking up 4 against Adesanya en route to a 4th round submission win. Overall, it is worth noting that he seems to go later in fights, not really ending it quick, but instead piling on the damage and wearing his opponent down before he digs in and puts them away. Chimaev is remarkably similar, though more describable stylistically. He comes across as much more of a ground-focused dominator, putting fighters down on the mat and just going to town on them. With takedowns in 7 of his 8 UFC fights and only 3 fights going past the first round, you can really see that game plan in effect. So with the takedowns, he works a 4.31 average, though he really doesn't need that many considering how effective his limited ones are. With all that mentioned, his power is very much a big part of his game, being able to dominate his opponent and keep them down for him to get the finish. I vividly remember him picking fighters up and walking across the cage with them. Striking sits at a 5.36 to 3.25, though those numbers are a bit biased given his more dominating performances. But looking at the 2 fights that have gone the distance, he was able to match up well on the feet with Burns and Usman, being able to take the edge with takedowns against Burns, though he was caught once and dropped at the end, and actually hold the striking lead against Usman, though that was with a short camp. The Vegas favorite is Chimaev here, and this is another fight I agonized over. It's very hard to pick, and even deciding live, I keep waffling back and forth. But in the end, I am going to pick, and I'm going to roll with du Plessis on this. Part of it is that when you look at the experience here, du Plessis has faced equal high-level competition that Chimaev has faced. Chimaev faced Burns and Usman. Du Plessis has faced Adesanya, Strickland, Whitaker, Vettori at one point as well. He's faced high-level competition, so that's even across the board, maybe even in favor of du Plessis. And comparing the 2 fighters, they're very similar. I just think that du Plessis is able to survive Chimaev's ground game or prevent him from running hog wild on him like he's done on other fighters. And if he's able to survive and get back to the feet, I think he can challenge him like Burns was able to later in the fight, or like Usman was by taking the fight the distance. And I think du Plessis matches up pretty well with the 2 fighters. Chimaev could 100% get the finish early with a submission or land a power punch. But then the same could be said for du Plessis. This fight's really close. My kind of motive for picking du Plessis, I just think he's done this before where he's found the way to win. I think he has the ability to find a way to win in this fight. So in the end, that's UFC 319. Overall, a pretty solid card, all things considered. That title fight obviously is the highlight of the night, but all throughout you've got some pretty fun fights and a pretty interesting question. I think Hooper Hernandez looks to be a fun fight, Cannonier Page looks to be a fun fight. I think all throughout this card you're looking at some interesting matchups and fun fights to determine future contenders or newcomers to the UFC. Pico Murphy will probably be a really good fight on this card. All that being said, leave a comment, leave a like, tell me what you thought, and have a great fight.